The yellow newspaper clipping, fragile with age, crackled softly as it was unfolded. Its headline, stark and bold, screamed a forgotten tragedy from an era of big hair and neon lights. Lexington artist vanishes after debut. The date beneath it, etched into the fading newsprint, read 1984. 39 years ago, a vibrant woman named Grace Holloway, an artist whose canvases sang with color and emotion, simply ceased to exist, leaving behind a bewildered community and a mystery that would haunt a generation. This isn't just a story about a missing person, it's a testament to how the past can reverberate through decades, how shadows can linger until a new light finally pierces them. We delve into the chilling narrative of Grace Holloway, a young artist whose promising future dissolved into thin air in the heart of Kentucky. Grace Holloway arrived in Lexington, Kentucky, in the early months of 1984, a whirlwind of creative energy and untamed ambition. She was new to the quiet southern city, a transplant from a bustling art scene elsewhere, drawn by the burgeoning creative community and the promise of a fresh start. Her eyes, often described as sparkling with an inner fire, scanned everything with an artist's keen perception, seeing beauty and inspiration where others saw only the mundane. Her apartment, filled with the scent of turpentine and oil paints, was a kaleidoscope of unfinished works and vibrant sketches, each piece a window into her passionate soul. Grace wasn't just an artist, she was artistry personified, living and breathing expression, convinced that her work would one day speak to the world. She had poured her entire being into preparing for her first solo gallery show, a culmination of years of dedication, and the entire city seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. The night of her debut was a resounding success. The gallery, usually a hushed space, buzzed with an uncommon energy, filled with art enthusiasts, critics, and curious townsfolk, all eager to witness the arrival of Lexington's newest artistic talent. Grace, radiant in a sapphire blue dress, moved among her admiring audience, her infectious smile lighting up the room. Her paintings, a collection of vivid landscapes and evocative portraits, garnered rave reviews, positioning her as a formidable and exciting new voice in the regional art scene. Conversations flowed easily, champagne flutes clinked, and the future seemed to stretch before Grace, bright and boundless. Promising commissions were discussed, connections were forged, and the buzz was undeniable. Grace Holloway was an artist on the cusp of greatness, her star about to ascend. She left the gallery that night, bathed in the glow of her triumph, the dreams she had harbored for so long finally within reach. Then, just days after her triumphant opening, the unthinkable happened. Grace Holloway vanished. Not a trace. Not a note. The silence she left behind was deafening, a stark contrast to the lively presence she had been just hours before. Her studio apartment, where her paints lay uncapped and her brushes still held the faint scent of linseed oil, meticulously organized yet eerily empty, offered no clues. Her car was still parked in its usual spot. Her beloved portfolio, filled with her most treasured sketches, remained untouched. She simply disappeared, leaving her art, her blossoming career, and a bewildered community grasping for answers in the sudden void. The promising future that had seemed so certain and within her grasp had evaporated into thin air, leaving only questions and a chilling sense of dread in its wake. The initial police investigation, launched with urgency and resources, quickly found itself mired in frustration. Officers scoured her apartment, interviewed everyone who had attended her gallery opening, and followed up on every whisper of a lead. Yet, despite their diligent efforts, nothing concrete emerged. There were no signs of forced entry, no struggle, no ransom demands, and no compelling reasons for her to simply walk away from everything she had worked for. The police were left with a baffling enigma, a case devoid of the usual breadcrumbs that lead to a resolution. Weeks turned into months, and the absence of any tangible clues began to weigh heavily, transforming the initial concern into annoying, exasperated frustration. The bright light of Grace Holloway's debut dimmed, replaced by the somber shadow of an inexplicable disappearance. What truly happened to Grace Holloway? How could a person, so full of life and talent, vanish without a trace? The answers remained elusive for decades, a cold case that haunted the collective memory of Lexington. This is only the beginning of her story, a journey through time, unanswered questions, and the relentless pursuit of truth. Make sure to subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into solved cold cases and other riveting true crime mysteries. The sudden disappearance of Grace Holloway sent shockwaves through Lexington, Kentucky. What began as a local curiosity quickly morphed into a chilling mystery that permeated every corner of the community. People whispered in grocery store aisles, speculating over coffee, their conversations laced with fear and disbelief. How could someone simply vanish? The vibrant art scene, once a source of pride, suddenly felt overshadowed by a pervasive sense of unease. Galleries that had celebrated Grace's arrival now felt somber, her absence a gaping wound. Parents held their children a little tighter, neighbors eyed each other with a new, subtle suspicion. The city, known for its genteel charm, now carried a palpable undercurrent of anxiety, a collective grief for a woman whose talent had just begun to blossom, and whose fate remained unknown. Grace wasn't just another missing person, she embodied the fragility of life, the suddenness with which a bright future could be extinguished. Her name became synonymous with the inexplicable, a cautionary tale whispered in hushed tones. The laughter that once filled her studio now echoed only in the memories of those who loved her, replaced by a deafening silence that spoke volumes of their anguish. For Grace's family, the shock was far more profound, an emotional torment that gnawed at their very souls. Her parents, living hundreds of miles away, were plunged into a living nightmare. Each passing day without news was a fresh stab of pain, each unanswered phone call a confirmation of their worst fears. They traveled to Lexington, their faces etched with desperation, plastering missing posters with Grace's vibrant, hopeful face across every lamppost and storefront. They held tearful press conferences, their voices breaking as they pleaded with anyone, everyone, for information, for a sign, for anything that could lead them to their beloved daughter. Their hope, though battered and bruised, remained stubbornly alive, flickering against the crushing weight of reality. They refused to believe she was gone permanently, clinging to the possibility that she had chosen to leave, that she would eventually return to them. Every doorbell ring, every unfamiliar car driving by, sent a jolt of adrenaline through their weary bodies, a fleeting surge of hope quickly followed by renewed despair. They dreamed of her, spoke to her photographs, and replayed every last conversation, searching for a hidden clue, a forgotten word that might explain her sudden absence. In the vacuum of concrete evidence, theories and speculation filled the void. Investigators initially explored every conceivable angle. Was it a voluntary disappearance? Had the pressures of her newfound success become too much for the sensitive artist? Perhaps she had run off with a secret lover, or sought a new anonymous life elsewhere. But those who knew Grace scoffed at such ideas. She was too passionate about her art, too committed to her career, to abandon it all without a word. Then came the darker theories, foul play. Had she crossed paths with someone dangerous? Was it a random act of violence, or something more personal, fueled by jealousy or a hidden grudge? The local rumor mill churned relentlessly, producing a myriad of suspects and scenarios, none of which held up under scrutiny. Every lead, no matter how tenuous, was pursued, but each one eventually led to a dead end, deepening the mystery and the collective frustration. Without a body, without a crime scene, without any tangible clues, the police found themselves adrift in a sea of conjecture. Despite the initial flurry of activity and the widespread community concern, the trail eventually grew cold. The headlines moved on to other stories, the missing posters faded in the sun and rain, and the constant media attention dwindled to an occasional mention. Grace Holloway's disappearance, once a burning topic, slowly receded into the annals of unsolved cases, a painful reminder of what could happen in their seemingly peaceful town. For the Lexington Police Department, it became Case File 84-012, a thick binder of unanswered questions tucked away in a dusty cabinet. The detectives who had worked tirelessly on the case were eventually reassigned, their hopes of a resolution fading with each passing year. The initial public outrage softened into a quiet, resigned sadness. The art world, after a period of mourning, found new talents to spotlight, and the memory of Grace Holloway, while never entirely forgotten, became A poignant, almost mythical tale. Yet, even as the years turned into decades, the lingering questions persisted like an unresolved chord. What happened to Grace? Did she suffer? Was she still alive somewhere? The absence of a definitive answer left a tragic void, not just for her family, but for an entire community. Her vibrant presence, her infectious artistic spirit, had been abruptly snatched away, leaving behind only echoes and a profound sense of injustice. Her empty studio, her untouched canvases, served as silent monuments to a life interrupted, a future unfulfilled. The mystery of Grace Holloway became a scar on the heart of Lexington, a constant, low thrum of unresolved sorrow that lay beneath the surface of everyday life. The community wondered, and perhaps feared, what dark secret lay buried, waiting to be unearthed. The sheer brutality of the unknown was often far worse than any truth. Decades passed, turning the vibrant colors of 1984 into the muted tones of history, and the chilling mystery of Grace Holloway's disappearance became a distant, painful memory for many, a story whispered occasionally, tinged with a nostalgic sadness. Time, the relentless architect of forgetfulness, had done its work. The initial shock had faded, replaced by the mundane rhythm of daily life, new generations growing up unaware of the terror that once gripped their town. For those who had known her, the wound never truly healed, merely scabbed over, sensitive to the touch. They carried her memory like a fragile, precious artifact, occasionally dusting it off, wondering if they had missed something, if there was a clue they had overlooked in their youth. The case, once a glaring headline, was now a file, thick with old reports and faded photographs, tucked away in the archives, an enduring obsession for a select few who refused to let Grace be forgotten. The world moved on. But Grace remained frozen in time, forever 25, forever missing. The world had not merely moved on, it had leaped forward, especially in the realm of science and technology. The rudimentary forensic techniques of the mid-80s had evolved into sophisticated tools capable of extracting information from the most minute traces of evidence. DNA profiling, once a nascent concept, was now a powerful, almost infallible identifier. Digital databases, advanced mapping, and interconnected information networks offered possibilities unimaginable to the original investigators. These advancements, subtle at first, then revolutionary, slowly began to reshape the landscape of law enforcement, offering a faint beacon of hope for cases that had long gone cold. Each new scientific breakthrough, each refinement in investigative methodology, chipped away at the darkness surrounding unresolved crimes, suggesting that even the most stubborn mysteries might one day yield their secrets to persistent inquiry and modern capabilities. It was this evolving landscape that spurred the Lexington Police Department to reevaluate its approach to unsolved cases. A dedicated cold case unit, either newly formed or significantly bolstered, was established, its mandate clear: to revisit the city's most enduring enigmas with fresh eyes and a renewed commitment. The Grace Holloway file, heavy with unfulfilled hopes, was among the first to be pulled from the dusty shelves. It represented a scar on the department's record, a ghost in the community, and a challenge tailor-made for the unit's mission. The detectives assigned to these cases were not just investigators. They were historical archaeologists, sifting through the debris of time, searching for fragments of truth that might have been overlooked or misunderstood in a different era. The case of Grace Holloway, silent for so long, was about to be heard again. A new pair of eyes, belonging to a sharp, determined detective named Sarah Jenkins, landed on Grace's file. Jenkins, too young to remember the original disappearance, approached the case with an objective detachment, unburdened by the emotional fatigue that had settled over the original team. She saw not just a stack of papers, but a puzzle with missing pieces, an incomplete narrative waiting to be finished. Her fresh perspective allowed her to spot subtle inconsistencies, overlooked annotations, and connections that had seemed irrelevant decades prior. She wasn't looking for new evidence necessarily, but for new ways to interpret the old. A detail about a specific type of paint, a casual comment from a witness about a vehicle, even the weather report from that fateful week in 1984, everything was re-examined, cross-referenced, and weighed against modern investigative paradigms. She wasn't just reading the file, she was deconstructing it, seeking the faint whispers of reality within the official reports. The painstaking process of re-interviewing original witnesses began. Many were now elderly, their memories tinged by the passage of time and the haze of subsequent life events. Some were eager to help, their consciences still burdened by the unsolved mystery. Others were reluctant, wary of reopening old wounds or revisiting painful recollections. Detective Jenkins and her team approached each individual with patience and empathy. They found that some witnesses, now detached from the immediate emotional intensity of 1984, were able to recall details previously deemed insignificant. A neighbor might remember an odd car parked on the street that night, dismissed as normal back then. A gallery patron might finally mention a fleeting, uncomfortable interaction Grace had with someone. Sometimes, the new information wasn't a revelation but a nuance, a tone of voice, a subtle gesture described 30 years later that suddenly made a previous statement carry a different weight. Each re-interview was like trying to piece together a shattered mosaic from fragmented, faded memories, but slowly, painstakingly, a clearer picture began to emerge. The silence surrounding Grace Holloway was beginning to crack. The silence surrounding Grace Holloway was beginning to crack. The breakthrough arrived not with a sudden bang, but with a quiet, almost imperceptible shift in perspective, born from Detective Jenkins' meticulous re-examination of a seemingly innocuous piece of evidence. A small, almost microscopic fiber found on a painting Grace had been working on just before her disappearance. In 1984, such a fiber would have been catalogued and perhaps even dismissed as ambient dust or lint. But in the modern lab, equipped with advanced microscopy and chemical analysis, this tiny strand told a different story. It wasn't a common household fiber. It was a synthetic polymer, specifically a type used in automotive upholstery from a very narrow production window in the early 1980s. This wasn't just a fiber. It was a digital breadcrumb, pointing directly to a particular make and model of car, a detail that had been overlooked for decades. This newfound data was cross-referenced with the re-interviewed witness statements. One elderly woman, who lived across the street from Grace, had vaguely recalled seeing a dark, boxy car parked near Grace's apartment late on the night she vanished, a detail she hadn't emphasized during the initial investigation, believing it unimportant. Now, armed with the fiber analysis, Detective Jenkins had a tangible lead. The cold case unit then meticulously combed through vehicle registration records from 1984 in Lexington and surrounding counties, filtering for the specific car models identified by the fiber. The list was still long, but manageable. The real pivotal moment came when they overlaid this list with other data points, individuals who had some, however slight, connection to Grace or her gallery, or who had a criminal record, even for minor offenses. This painstaking, almost archaeological layering of data began to narrow the vast sea of possibilities. The technology that truly electrified the investigation and led to the identification of a prime suspect was, inevitably, DNA. A sample of Grace's blood, found on a discarded paint rag in her studio, a trace element the original investigators had noted but lacked the technology to fully analyze, was resubmitted for modern DNA profiling. While it was Grace's blood, the lab technicians had also detected an incredibly minute, almost imperceptible trace of foreign biological material, likely skin cells, mixed within. This tiny, almost invisible piece of evidence, insufficient for analysis in 1984, was now run through the cutting-edge CODIS database. The results were instantaneous and chilling, a DNA profile matching a local man, Arthur Penn. Arthur Penn had never been a suspect, never even mentioned in the original reports. The painstaking process of connecting the dots began in earnest. Arthur Penn, a seemingly unremarkable man, had been a janitor at the gallery where Grace's debut show took place. He had an alibi for the night of her disappearance. He had clocked out just before the end of the show and claimed to have gone straight home. His name was a faint footnote in the original gallery attendance records, nothing more. But the DNA didn't lie. The tiny skin cells intimately mixed with Grace's blood on her own paint rag created an undeniable link, placing him at her studio, likely during or immediately after her disappearance. The fiber, initially a curious anomaly, now became a powerful corroborating detail, Arthur Penn had owned a dark, boxy sedan of the exact make and model indicated by the automotive fiber, purchased new in 1983. Arthur Penn's background, when meticulously pieced together, revealed a man who lived on the periphery. He was a quiet, almost invisible fixture in Lexington. He had worked various odd jobs, often in service industries, moving from one low-paying position to another, never drawing attention to himself. He had no serious criminal record, only a few minor infractions from his youth, shoplifting, a bar fight, nothing that would have flagged him as a person of interest in a missing person case. He was married, had 2 grown children, and was known in his small neighborhood as a reserved, if somewhat gruff, individual. His life presented an image of bland normalcy, making the potential revelation of his involvement in Grace Holloway's disappearance all the more shocking and disturbing. With Arthur Penn now identified as the prime suspect, the cold case unit initiated a careful and methodical surveillance operation. They couldn't afford to alarm him. Decades of waiting meant they needed to build an airtight case. Every one of his movements was tracked, every phone call monitored. Investigators revisited old records, searching for any connection, any interaction, however brief, between Penn and Grace Holloway that might have been missed. They interviewed his past employers, his neighbors, his family members, all under the guise of routine inquiries, slowly building a comprehensive profile of the man. They needed to understand not just that he was connected, but how and why. The net slowly tightened around Arthur Penn, a man who had lived openly in the community for nearly 40 years, his dark secret buried deep beneath the veneer of an ordinary life, unknowingly watched as the truth finally broke through the surface of time. The truth, long buried beneath the surface of time, finally broke through. The day of the arrest dawned like any other, but for Arthur Penn, it would mark the end of nearly 4 decades of living a lie. Detectives, having meticulously gathered enough evidence to secure a warrant, moved in swiftly and silently. Penn was apprehended outside his unassuming suburban home, just as he was leaving for his morning shift at a local hardware store, a routine he had maintained for years. There was no dramatic chase, no struggle, only the quiet, efficient click of handcuffs and the stunned look on Penn's face as the charges were read. "Arthur Penn, you are under arrest for the disappearance and presumed murder of Grace Holloway." The words, spoken softly, carried the weight of 39 years of unanswered questions, echoing through the quiet street as neighbors peered from behind their curtains, their faces a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. The long-awaited moment had arrived, not with a bang, but with the quiet inevitability of justice finally catching up. The news of Arthur Penn's arrest tore through Lexington like a shockwave, reverberating through every household and coffee shop. The community, which had largely resigned itself to Grace Holloway's case remaining an eternal mystery, was plunged into a state of profound disbelief. Arthur Penn? The quiet janitor from the Contemporary Art Gallery? The man who had lived in their midst, seemingly an ordinary, unremarkable individual, for decades? Grandparents recounted the whispers of 1984 to their grandchildren, who had only ever known Grace Holloway as a tragic local legend. The collective memory of Grace, which had faded into a soft focus over time, now snapped into sharp, vivid clarity. People recalled seeing Penn at the very gallery opening where Grace had celebrated her triumph, a silent, almost invisible presence in the background. The shock was not just at the brutal nature of the crime, but at its proximity, its everyday, ordinary facade. It was a stark reminder that evil often wears the most unassuming mask, living next door, working alongside them, tucked away in plain sight. The identity of the perpetrator was, for many, the most unsettling revelation. Arthur Penn had no obvious connection to Grace Holloway beyond his employment at the gallery. He wasn't a spurned lover, a disgruntled business partner, or a known associate. He was simply the janitor, a background figure, someone barely noticed. This lack of a clear, dramatic connection made the crime all the more terrifying. It suggested a random, opportunistic act, or a deeper, more insidious motive that remained hidden from public view. Grace Holloway, the vibrant artist, and Arthur Penn, the quiet janitor, seemed to occupy 2 entirely different worlds within Lexington. The notion that these two disparate lives had intersected in such a horrifying way, leading to Grace's tragic end, was difficult for the community to reconcile. It shattered their sense of security, making them question the normalcy of everyday encounters. During the initial interrogations, Arthur Penn maintained a stony silence for hours, his face a mask of carefully controlled composure. When he finally spoke, his voice was flat, devoid of emotion, offering only vague denials and expressions of bewilderment. He claimed to have no knowledge of Grace Holloway's disappearance, insisting he had simply gone home after his shift that night. He denied ever being in her apartment after the gallery closed, and certainly denied any involvement in her fate. However, as detectives presented him with the irrefutable DNA evidence, the microscopic skin cells found commingled with Grace's blood on her own paint rag, and the detailed forensic analysis linking his car to the fiber, the cracks in his stoic facade began to show. His denials became less firm, laced with hesitation, and a flicker of something akin to fear briefly crossed his eyes. The weight of nearly 40 years of guilt, meticulously unearthed by modern science, was slowly beginning to crush his carefully constructed wall of deception. The arrest ignited an immediate and intense media frenzy. Local and national news outlets descended upon Lexington, eager to cover the dramatic resolution of a decades-old cold case. Grace Holloway's haunting photograph, once faded newspaper clippings, now graced television screens and internet headlines, her story brought back into the public consciousness with renewed urgency. Reporters camped outside the police station, vying for sound bites, desperate to uncover every detail of the shocking arrest. The quiet streets of Lexington, usually serene, buzzed with the constant hum of news vans and the clamor of camera crews. Grace, silenced for so long, was finally speaking again through the relentless pursuit of justice, her long-forgotten tragedy now front-page news, a testament to the enduring power of a cold case finally brought to light. The world was watching, waiting to understand what truly happened that fateful night in 1984. The world was watching, waiting to understand what truly happened that fateful night in 1984, and with Arthur Penn's arrest, the investigation wasn't concluding, it was intensifying, entering an entirely new phase. Detectives, invigorated by the breakthrough, immediately secured search warrants for Penn's current residence and any properties he owned or had access to in 1984. The cold case unit, now a whirlwind of activity, meticulously combed through every inch of Penn's life, searching for anything, a hidden diary, a forgotten trophy, a buried memento, that could shed light on Grace's final moments or provide further corroboration of Penn's guilt. Old leads, which had gone nowhere decades ago, were revisited with new eyes framed by the knowledge of Penn's involvement. They re-interviewed people who had known Penn in 1984, asking specific questions about his behavior, his moods, and his interactions around the time of Grace's disappearance. It was an exhaustive, painstaking process, like excavating a forgotten historical site, each shovel stroke potentially unearthing a crucial artifact. The sheer volume of new information, combined with the decades-old files, created a mountain of data, which modern analytical tools help them to organize and decipher. Uncovering the motive behind Grace's disappearance became the central, most agonizing puzzle. Penn, still largely uncooperative, offered no coherent explanation. Investigators delved into his psychological profile, seeking patterns, triggers, or dark impulses that might explain such a heinous act against a woman he barely knew. They discovered a history of professional resentments. Penn often felt overlooked, underappreciated, and harbored a deep-seated bitterness towards those he perceived as successful or privileged. Grace, with her vibrant talent and sudden acclaim, represented everything Penn felt he was not. It wasn't a sudden, passionate crime, but a culmination of years of simmering resentment, possibly fueled by a perceived slight or a moment of intoxicated rage. The details that emerged painted a picture of a man consumed by envy, who likely snapped, lashing out at the source of his perceived inadequacy. The motive wasn't grand or complex. It was chillingly prosaic, a dark impetus born of petty jealousy and a profound sense of personal failure, now projected onto Grace's burgeoning success. With Penn refusing to confess, detectives meticulously pieced together the narrative of what happened to Grace, constructing the truth through a mosaic of forensic evidence, reinterpreted witness statements, and psychological profiling. They believed Penn, lingering after the gallery emptied, had either followed Grace or found an opportunity to confront her at her nearby apartment. The DNA evidence placed him inside her studio. The fiber evidence placed his car outside. They theorized a confrontation, perhaps an unwanted advance, escalated quickly. Grace, feisty and independent, would have resisted. The blood on the rag, her own, suggested violence. They hypothesized that Penn, in a moment of panic or uncontrolled rage, either killed her in the apartment or subdued her and transported her in his car. The missing pieces of the puzzle, where Grace's body was, exactly how she died, remained elusive, but the overall sequence of events began to form a coherent, horrifying picture. Every piece of evidence, from the microscopic fiber to the DNA, corroborated a timeline that pointed unequivocally to Arthur Penn as the last person to see Grace Holloway alive. As the picture of the crime solidified, the team began the difficult process of reconstructing Grace Holloway's story, not just as a victim, but as the vibrant woman she was. Through the lens of the evidence, they gave her a voice after years of silence. They spoke of her dreams, her passion for art, her infectious laugh. They showed her photographs not just as a missing person, but as a living, breathing artist whose potential was violently stolen. The narrative wasn't just about solving a crime. It was about honoring Grace, ensuring her legacy was not solely defined by her tragic end. They wanted the world to remember her art, her spirit, the bright promise she held before her life was so cruelly extinguished. This was her story, finally told, pieced together from the fragments of injustice. For Grace's family, the arrest brought a tumult of complex emotions. Relief, profound and almost overwhelming, washed over them, a sense that the almost 4-decade-long nightmare was finally nearing its end. But this relief was inextricably mixed with renewed grief. The hope, however faint, that Grace might still be alive, however remote, was now definitively crushed. Knowing who was responsible brought a form of closure, but it also brought the agonizing reality of what had truly happened. Processing the truth, the violent end that Grace had likely faced, after so long clinging to the possibility of her return, was a profound struggle. The pain of her absence, which had dulled to a chronic ache, now sharpened, raw and immediate. They had their answers, but the cost was a fresh wave of sorrow, preparing them for the daunting prospect of seeing justice through the courts. The daunting prospect of seeing justice through the courts now loomed large, a new, albeit purposeful, chapter in the decades-long saga of Grace Holloway. The trial of Arthur Penn finally began, a somber affair that drew national attention and packed the Lexington courthouse. The air in the courtroom was thick with anticipation, heavy with the weight of years of unanswered questions and the collective grief of a community that had waited nearly 4 decades for this moment. Judge Davies, a stern but fair arbiter, presided over the proceedings, while the prosecution, led by District Attorney Eleanor Vance, presented their case with a meticulousness born of unwavering dedication. Penn, seated silently at the defense table, his face devoid of emotion, appeared almost detached from the gravity of the accusations, a stark contrast to the palpable tension that gripped every other person in the room. This wasn't merely a criminal trial, it was a reckoning, a public unveiling of the truth that had been hidden for far too long. District Attorney Vance's opening statement was a powerful testament to the perseverance of justice, outlining the chilling narrative pieced together from fragments of the past and breakthroughs in modern forensics. The most compelling pieces of evidence were then presented, each one a hammer blow against Penn's claims of innocence. The jury saw magnified images of the microscopic automotive fiber, identified as belonging to Penn's 1983 sedan, found embedded in Grace Holloway's painting. They heard expert testimony detailing the precise match, explaining how such an infinitesimal piece of evidence could, with scientific certainty, link Penn to the crime scene. Then came the DNA evidence, the irrefutable biological signature. The forensic pathologist presented diagrams and explained how Grace's blood, found on the paint rag, contained the minute epidermal cells matching Arthur Penn's DNA profile. This was the linchpin, the scientific proof that Penn had been in Grace's studio, interacting with her at the time of her disappearance. While no body had ever been found, the sheer volume and compelling nature of the circumstantial and forensic evidence created an overwhelming picture of Penn's guilt. The prosecution also introduced Penn's history of resentment and documented instances of his bitterness towards successful individuals, subtly suggesting a motive of envy and rage. The defense, led by a seasoned public defender, attempted to sow doubt, arguing that the evidence, while circumstantial, did not conclusively prove murder. They challenged the integrity of the decades-old evidence, suggesting contamination or misinterpretation by modern labs. They questioned the chain of custody for some items and attempted to portray Penn as a victim of circumstance, a convenient scapegoat for a case that had long baffled authorities. The defense strategy hinged on creating enough reasonable doubt to prevent a conviction, emphasizing the lack of a body and the absence of direct eyewitness testimony linking Penn to Grace's immediate disappearance, trying to minimize the impact of the DNA as merely placing him at the gallery, not necessarily at the time of the crime. However, the defense's arguments often faltered under the weight of powerful witness testimonies. Former colleagues of Penn were called, painting a picture of a man who, while outwardly quiet, harbored a deep-seated anger. But it was the testimony of Grace's parents, now frail with age, that truly resonated through the courtroom. Their voices, though trembling, spoke of a daughter full of life and promise, whose future was cruelly snatched away. They described the agonizing decades of uncertainty, the relentless hope, and the crushing despair. Each word was a testament to their enduring love and their desperate quest for answers. They spoke not of vengeance, but of the need for truth, for Grace to finally rest in peace. Their tearful pleas cut through the legal jargon, reminding everyone of the profound human cost of Penn's actions. After weeks of testimony, emotional appeals, and scientific explanations, the jury retreated for deliberations. The tension in the courthouse was almost unbearable. Every television camera, every reporter, every family member held their breath. Days passed, punctuated by rumor and speculation. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the jury returned. The courtroom fell silent. Grace's family clutched hands, their faces etched with a mixture of fear and profound hope. The foreman stood, and the verdict was read, clear and unwavering. Guilty! A collective gasp, then a quiet, profound sigh of relief swept through the room. Justice, though long delayed, had finally arrived for Grace Holloway. The verdict echoed through the courtroom, a resounding declaration of guilty that finally brought a measure of resolution to a tragic story spanning nearly 4 decades. For Grace Holloway, justice, though cruelly delayed, was ultimately served. Arthur Penn, the man who had selfishly extinguished her bright future, would now face the consequences of his heinous actions. The sentencing, a few weeks later, saw Penn receive the maximum penalty allowed by law for murder, ensuring he would spend the remainder of his life incarcerated, a stark symbol of society's unwavering commitment to holding perpetrators accountable, no matter how long it takes. There was no triumphant cheering, no overt celebration, only a quiet, profound sense of solemnity. The legal proceedings wrapped a final, definitive chapter around Grace's disappearance, transforming it from an agonizing cold case into a resolved crime. The legal system, slow and deliberate, had finally delivered its ultimate judgment, securing a victory for perseverance and truth. The resolution of the case allowed the community of Lexington to begin a long overdue process of healing. For years, Grace Holloway's disappearance had been an open wound, a constant, low thrum of unresolved sorrow beneath the city's surface. Now, with the truth finally laid bare and the perpetrator brought to justice, that wound could begin to close. The collective sense of unease, the subtle suspicion that had lingered, began to dissipate. People could finally mourn Grace, not just as a missing person, but as a victim whose fate was known. Commemorative events were held, allowing citizens to grieve openly, to share memories, and to reflect on the impact of her loss. The closure wasn't an erasure of pain, but an acceptance, allowing the community to move forward, scarred but stronger. Understanding that even the darkest secrets eventually come to light. It was a testament to the fact that no life, no matter how abruptly ended, is ever truly forgotten. Grace Holloway's legacy, once overshadowed by the mystery of her vanishing, could now be remembered for what it truly was: the vibrant, passionate artistry of a gifted young woman. Her paintings, once symbols of what was lost, became powerful reminders of her enduring spirit. Local galleries and art institutions, invigorated by the resolution of her case, organized retrospective exhibitions of her work. Her canvases, filled with bold colors and evocative imagery, spoke volumes, telling her story through the language she knew best. News articles focused not just on her tragic end, but on her promising beginnings, her unique vision, and the impact she had, however brief, on the art scene. Grace Holloway was no longer just a cold case victim. She was Grace, the artist, whose life, though cut short, continued to inspire, reminding everyone of the beauty she brought into the world. Her art lived on, a vibrant, tangible testament to a life that refused to be forgotten. The successful resolution of Grace's case stands as a powerful testament to the unwavering power of perseverance. It highlights the tireless dedication of law enforcement officers like Detective Sarah Jenkins, who refused to let an old file gather dust, who saw not just records but a life waiting for justice. It underscored the enduring hope of Grace's family, who, despite decades of agony, never gave up the fight for answers. Their unwavering belief, their consistent pressure, fueled the continued efforts to solve the mystery. This case became a beacon for other cold cases, demonstrating that with evolving technology, fresh perspectives, and relentless determination, even the most challenging and long-forgotten crimes can be solved. It emphasizes the critical importance of never giving up, of understanding that every victim deserves justice, and every family deserves closure, no matter how much time has passed. In the end, Grace Holloway's story is a poignant reminder of the fragility of life, the resilience of the human spirit, and the relentless pursuit of justice. It speaks to the strength of hope that transcends generations and the profound impact of every single life. Her memory, once shrouded in shadow, now shines brightly, illuminated by the truth. The dark chapter of her disappearance has closed, but the light of her artistry and the triumph of justice will continue to resonate. Thank you for joining us on this journey through one of Kentucky's most enduring cold cases. If you found this deep dive compelling, please like this video, share your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe to our channel for more true crime stories that seek to uncover the truth and honor the victims. Join us next time as we explore another case where justice, against all odds, prevailed.